Hey, welcome back to the channel. So, I went through a bankruptcy and I want to tell the story of, first of all, how horrible it was, but also how God provided. And I have to admit that my faith walk has not been a very strong one since those days, but I wanted to tell the story. I know a lot of people are really struggling financially now, and I want to tell the story of how bankruptcy affected me and how I deal with money now. So if you've been watching my videos at all, you know that I have been self-employed my entire life. When I first got married, I was only 18. By like 19 or 20, I owned a business. I started a daycare to take care of my kids so I didn't have to, work outside the home and that kind of thing. And I had built that to 65 kids and 13 employees and all the things. And I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. Even when I was a kid, I was, cutting lawns, washing cars, bathing people's dogs, whatever, to make a buck. And my husband at the time also had that spirit, but he hadn't been raised around it like I had. I had been raised by entrepreneurs and, we never worked for anybody. We always kind of did our own thing. So I started the daycare in my single wide trailer with just a few kids. And then we ended up buying a house, and my husband had a job at a company, and I had the daycare in the house. And just several months, not even a year after we had moved into our not brand new home, but new to us, our home, my husband came home without discussing it with me and told me that he had quit his job, had given his 2 weeks notice, and he was going to start his own business. He worked for a company that made equipment, and he believed that he could repair this equipment and start a business doing that. And I was shocked, but I was supportive because I got it. I understood wanting to do something for himself. And so he started that business, and it took a while. My daycare kind of supported us for a while, but then his business took off, and he was making way more than he had ever made for the company. So it was going well. Well, then a few years later, fast forward, probably 8, 9, 10 years, my daycare was at its maximum. It was going along, but I had lost my heart for it. My children no longer needed to be there. They were in school full time. The parents were driving me nuts. The daycare wasn't making much of a profit. My husband's business was supporting us now. The daycare had high overhead. Plus, I spent a lot of money on the children. So the profit margins were low. It became more of a business of heart than it was of profit. So at that time, and if you've seen previous videos, you know that we bought a boat in Florida and brought it up to live on. Well, our home and my business were in Tacoma, which is about 45 minutes to an hour from Seattle, depending on traffic. And we were going to live on the boat in Seattle. So we had the discussion, let's just close down the daycare. We're selling the house. Let's just move our life to Seattle. That's where I was going to church, and this is what we wanted to do. So I closed my business and I joined forces with my husband's business. At this time, he had, when he first started his business, he was just working out of a van, out of the house, and now he actually had a warehouse in Seattle. He had employees. He needed someone to kind of come in and do marketing, glorified executive assistant is what I was for him. And so we joined forces, and the business was rocking and rolling. We were making money hand over fist. Now, keep in mind, we were in our 20s. This was, because we had started at 18. So 10 years later, we're still in our late 20s, and we were making more money than we could ever imagine. We bought the boat. We were living on it, all the kind of things. Well, the business we were in, and I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail about what we did because, people that may know us or know him, he doesn't need to be discussed in his business and things. But the business we were in started to make a huge industry change where the equipment we were repairing was no longer going to be needed in this particular industry. And we saw it coming. And we were attempting to adjust and take on new accounts and diversify the type of equipment we were repairing and working on so that we could stay busy. But this change happened in about a 6-month time. We had like 3 big corporate accounts, and they all kind of made the shift at the same time, which was really weird. Really weird. I mean, you would think one corporation might make a change or whatever, but it's like kind of today where, businesses are switching over to AI really quickly. That's kind of what happened here. They switched from one way of doing things to another, all kind of at the same time, which put our repair business kind of out of business because there was no equipment to repair for these big corporations anymore. So we started to have some huge financial issues, and we were attending church at the time. And at that time I was involved in a mega church. My husband, he followed my lead. He was not raised in the church. He wasn't familiar with, the teachings and all that kind of thing, but he came along with me about every third Sunday, but the children and I were going to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, and very involved in the church. And the church I was involved in was a mega church. It was a prosperity teaching church. Now, today, I don't know how I feel about that, but I want to tell you how it affected our lives then. So we were trying to diversify. We were trying to keep things afloat. We were doing all we could, and it was just going down quickly. We had employees. We were trying to keep them busy, trying to keep them paid, and it was just getting to where we weren't even going to be able to make payroll. And we were advised by our accountant and lawyer to file for bankruptcy. Oh, man, that was not something I wanted to do. I had never failed like this before. It felt like a huge failure, even though looking back, we really had no choice. The creditors were calling. Going through bankruptcy not only is a hit to your pride, but it's just emotional. Now, maybe not everybody would go through that, but I was someone who paid my bills. I paid them on time. I had great credit, and to not be able to make those obligations tore me apart. And it tore my husband apart too, because we were both very responsible for the age we were. We were very responsible, and we had never had anything like this happen before, and we were fighting it tooth and nail. Well, one day we were in church, and he was with me, and we were kind of just sitting there after the sermon, and people were leaving, and we were just sitting there just kind of praying. And we were going through this bankruptcy. We were not feeling good about it. We were feeling guilty, like we were letting all our creditors down. We were letting our employees down. We were losing everything. The boat we were living on had been taken from us because we were making payments on it, so we had to turn it over to the bank, and our car had to be turned over to the bank. We had moved into a rental property that we really couldn't even hardly afford, but we were trying to stay in the school district so our kids could go to school and finish out the year. And because this was like in September, October, and we wanted them to finish out that 1 year at least before we moved. And we were just living off what little credit cards we had left. And while we were sitting there, one of the pastors came over, and this was a mega church, so they didn't really know us. I mean, we were just one of the crowd, but I mean, maybe they did know us. So I was a tither, and we tithed 10%, and it was in the tens of thousands a year we would give this church. So maybe they didn't know who we were. I don't know, but I didn't think they knew who we were. And this pastor came over, and he was just one of the associate pastors. He was nothing big. And he says, God told me to come over and talk to you guys. And we're like, yeah, what's going on? And he says, you're going through something. What's going on? And we told him, we're going through this bankruptcy. We're losing everything. We're just feeling so guilty. And so he prayed over us. And while he was praying over us, he prophesied that this was a move from Satan to, crush our faith. But, and he brought up Job. And if any of you are familiar with that, Job was in the Bible, and basically God and the devil had a conversation, and God let the devil throw all the horrible things at Job to test his faith. And he went through some stuff. You should read the book sometime. But he was using, that reference with us, that we were going through this. It was a test and da-da-da. But if we were to come out on the other side, we would have everything plus given back to us. And I held on to that. My husband wanted to hold on to it, but he didn't have the faith I had. So he was following my lead, but I held on to that. And we went through this bankruptcy, and it was horrible. I remember them coming to get our car, and we were just left with nothing. And we finished out the school year. In fact, I don't even think we finished out the school year because we couldn't even make the rent anymore. I mean, we had nothing. And my husband at the time went to work for his brother-in-law, and this was in 1999. So it was when the internet was just getting started, and the brother-in-law was starting a company that, if it had succeeded, would be similar to an Amazon. It was like an online mall kind of a thing where you could buy it, and it was all in its infancy though. And he went to work for him, but it was no pay because it was stocks in the company that if this thing took off, they were going to make a lot of money. And meanwhile, I was home with the kids. I was trying to figure things out. It was a struggle. So we were in that rental for a few months, and I literally was buying groceries on a credit card that I couldn't even make the minimum payment on so that I could tithe. This is how strong the prosperity message was with me. And my husband did not agree on this, but I believed that if I was faithful and I tithed, God was going to get us through this. Today, I don't know if I would do that, but let me finish the story. So we end up having to move in with my mother. And she's in the house she's in now. And because we had nothing. And we put the kids in public school because they had been in private school and all the things, and they were actually sleeping on the floor in her spare room because we didn't have any furniture. She gave us her guest room. So we had that bed. And my husband, by this time, the company he was working for that was going to be this big thing had collapsed. All the money was gone. That had shut down. Had it taken off, it would have rivaled. It would have been like an Amazon situation. But I don't know if it was just too early or too soon, or maybe not the right people running it. I don't know, but it collapsed. And so now here we're sitting here at my mom's house, no job, no nothing. My husband, God bless him, he dealt with it the best way he could. He literally lost himself in online video games. And I looked at the back of his head every day. And I just couldn't believe that this was our future. I knew going out and getting, a job was not going to support us. So I knew I had to come up with something new. And he and I had talked about different things, but he just did not have the energy or the heart or the will to do anything at this point. His entire world had come crashing down. He very much identified with his success, and it was gone. He didn't know who he was. He went into a depression like I've never seen before. Well, I ended up buying a book. I think I was in like Barnes and Nobles back then, and just kind of going through and thinking of things I could do to make money, and because I've always been kind of crafty, whatever. And I found this book, Build a Website in a Weekend. And it was a book kind of like those books you see now, Websites for Dummies or Math for Dummies or whatever. It was kind of a thing. Build a website in a weekend through Microsoft Front Page. If any of you have been around in the website building community as long as I have, you'll remember Front Page. It was a program, with the Microsoft Office that would build websites. So I got on my computer and I self-taught myself to build websites. And so before we had gone bankrupt, we had bought a domain name. And I'm not going to name it because it's still out there, but we had bought a domain name that was highly connected to the business we had. Thinking that someday we'd do something with it. This is, before all of this happened, before we went bankrupt, websites were really not a thing, but our brother-in-law, who had this online mall business that he was running, said, you guys need to buy this name because it could be worth something someday, or if you decide you want a website, it's going to be perfect for SEO and blah, blah, blah. We didn't know what he was talking about. We bought the name, for whatever the fee was back then, $20 a year or something. So I built a website based on that name. And what was happening in the industry had been in is, like I said, the corporations had changed so that they no longer needed this equipment we were servicing. And so the market had, and this was a very narrow niche. So the market had been flooded with this used equipment. And what was happening is smaller companies, mom and pop shops, were starting businesses in this industry and needed this used equipment because they couldn't afford the big equipment, and they were still doing things the way the corporations had done it before. So they needed this equipment. And so I was talking with my husband, and yeah, there's got to be something we can do with this. And we kicked it around. And anyway, we thought, well, this online mall thing, we could do something like that with this used equipment. Now, I can't remember if eBay was a thing yet, but basically the website I built was similar to eBay, except I was the only negotiator. That you couldn't post things yourself. I posted everything, and then I would find a buyer, connect with the seller, and I was the middleman. I was the broker. And so I built this website and started doing this. And the first sale, I remember, I had no idea, because when I had worked with my husband, I was on a different end of the business. I didn't know the players. And I says, hey, we've got an offer on this piece of equipment. How do I get it shipped? The logistics and stuff. And he's over there playing video games. He's like, what? He didn't believe anything was going to happen with this. And, weeks and weeks had gone by, and I'm over here working away, and he's on his, video games, and life is going on. And he kind of perked his ears up and started paying attention and told me who to contact and blah, 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 blah. And so that was the beginning of the business that he still runs today, which is a multi-million-dollar worldwide company. And he actually has his own line of equipment and everything now. It grew from that. And he still has the original website that I built, which is hilarious. But anyway, while that was kind of taking off, I was still going to church. I was still praying. I was still, I've got all my journals where I was journaling and, God, you're testing us, but I believe you're going to, give us it all back. We're going to get it all back, and blah, blah, blah. And there was a neighborhood up the street. Now, we had never planned on living in this town. We really wanted to go back to Seattle, but by now, the kids were in the school, things are going, and there was a brand new housing development being built just a few blocks down the road from my mom's house. And I would walk, every day just to clear my head. And I started walking that development. And somebody at church, one of the pastors or somebody had said, you need to claim, what you want from God. And so I would walk through that development and claim a house. And, I'm going to live in this neighborhood. I'm going to live in this neighborhood. And I'm going to have a house like that and blah, 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 and I would claim that. And within now all of this happened from the time we went bankrupt to 18 months later. We were buying a brand new house, brand new build in that neighborhood, 4,200 square foot home. Nothing to sneeze at. Now back in those days, that was only $300,000. But that may as well been $3 million, But working from my mom's rec room with a couple of little computers, they were desktops back then, laptops weren't really that big of a deal, but we built this business and started selling this used equipment and getting a name out there, and buying that domain name was the smartest thing we'd ever done. Once it started moving, my husband jumped on board, and he knew the equipment and he knew the players. And so he started heading up the sales and the negotiating and all that. And I would do the website and posting the equipment. And, we were just a power couple. We were a team, and we bought that home, and we were able to put an in-home office, in the business with its own entrance and everything. The kids were happy in their school. It was a great neighborhood. It was a gated community. Next thing we know, we had new cars. Next thing we know, we had another boat. I mean, we had been given everything back and then some. And I praised God for that. And I continued to make the drive from where we were living cleared the hour up to church 2 or 3 times a week and just praising God and thanking him for what he had done for us and tithing to the church. And now it had become even, we were making more than we had ever made. And it was just amazing. But then it's almost like, and my husband was right along with that. He believed God had helped us, or at least that's what he told me. And then after a few years, and everything's going great, my husband decided he wasn't interested in going to church anymore. He didn't want anything to do with God. He started to fight me on the tithing. But it was a non-negotiable with me, and I kept tithing and all the things. So going through the bankruptcy was one of the worst things I've ever gone through emotionally. I think even more so than my divorce, because it was just such failure. It just felt like such failure, and like I was letting so many people down when I had been, responsible for so many people and so many, and my husband, I say me, but us, and then after the divorce, I lost my faith too. And I haven't completely gotten it back yet. And I'm telling this story because I want to remind myself of what I had with God. And I really felt like I had that relationship with God. And I've forgotten what that is. And I want to start working towards that again. And getting back to the money, when I left my husband, we were making tons of money, and working very little. I mean, we had set it up in such a way that the business pretty much ran itself. We worked Monday through Friday, but it was a few hours a day, and we had a lot of free time. We could travel the world because as long as we had a laptop, we were working. We had salesmen all over the country. We were shipping things worldwide. I mean, he still has that business today, and it's thriving. But my relationship with money had changed. It no longer was my identity. And I feel like it still was a big part of his identity. And watching him turn his back on God after God had given us so much back and then some was hard for me. I felt like he had played me a little bit, whatever. That's not why we divorced. But I mean, those were things going through my mind. And I have another video where I discuss the divorce and how we separated and everything. But basically, I walked away with very little. I moved out. I moved into an apartment. I took a couple pieces of furniture and some personal belongings, but I pretty much left him with everything. I left him with all the rentals and the boats and the house and in the business. And, I continued to work with him for a while, but eventually, I just let it all go because I didn't have that relationship with money anymore where it was part of my identity. And going through the divorce, I think, is when I lost my faith. I remember going to church and people finding out that I was going through divorce, and almost like they turned their backs on me a little bit. I wasn't being nurtured as much anymore. Now all of a sudden I didn't have the money. I didn't have the status. I was a divorcee. And since then, and I'm not going to name the church, but that particular church has grown, and it's got locations, all down in the West Coast. And the pastor that was there when I was there passed away. His son took over and has become a celebrity preacher. And I really got a bad taste in my mouth about that. And what I need to remember going forward is God is not the church. God is not the pastors. God is not the people in the church. And I still feel like I'm spiritual, but I have not been to church in, God, probably since 2010. I mean, I've gone with my daughter to her church for different events and things, but I don't have a church home. I don't know if I'm ready for that or will be anytime soon. I did buy a Bible recently, even though I have like 4 of them in storage. I thought I'll just start with a fresh one. I haven't read it yet. I haven't even opened it yet, but I feel like I need to do that. I need to figure out why I turned away from my faith. I understand that the church let me down, but God provided once. And I mean, it's nothing short of a miracle. I mean, yeah, we were go-getters and we were no dummies and we figured it out, but we went from literally zero to making six figures in 18 months, with little or no knowledge of the internet or anything. It was just, blood, sweat, and tears, and we did it. And I can't help but believe there was some kind of divine intervention there, and I need to remember that. Now I live very simply. I live in my RV. I sold my home. I blew the money. I took my grandkids on an amazing trip down the coast and spent all my money and had to come back when I had planned on traveling. I can't say that I'm a good steward of money anymore. If I get it, I spend it. But I think going through the bankruptcy changed my way of thinking about money. Before it was all, got to make money, got to have money, got to have this, got to have that. And now I don't feel that way at all about money. I just it's a tool that I use to survive. But I think going through bankruptcy was so horrific and so traumatizing that I feel like nothing can hurt me now. I mean, even when I went through cancer and liver failure and all the things I went through 2017 to 2020, all the sickness and the horrible, and then losing my business, through the pandemic and all of that. Yeah, it sucked, but it wasn't my identity. It was a speed bump, and I'll just keep trucking along. And that, I think, is the most important lesson I learned through all of it is, our identity is our soul and our purpose in life, whatever that is. Now I'm just starting to ramble, I think, because I'm thinking, why did I walk away from God and the church when He provided so clearly? I felt like my marriage lasted longer than it probably would have because I was a Christian and I did not believe in divorce. But then once I watered down my faith and stepped a little bit away from the church, it was okay to get divorced. I mean, my thoughts on that changed. I don't know. Anyway, going forward, I'm going to do a few more videos on my thoughts on this and start sharing maybe some things out of the Bible and how, and watch my growth and see what happens. But I hope this has been helpful to somebody who is struggling with money. Now, in our situation, we had family. We had a safety net. We would have been homeless as if it hadn't been for my mother letting us move in with her. I mean, we moved in with our 2 kids and our dog. And had she not been there, I don't know what would have happened with us, but we had family to fall back on. And so I hope that everyone out there that might be going through, I mean, even now, after I blew all that money and I'm in my RV, where am I at? I'm parked in my mom's driveway. I'm working again and I'm building myself back up again. I've reinvented myself, I don't know how many times. And I'm getting to the point where I could probably maybe get an apartment or something, but I don't think I want to. I think I want to stay in the RV. I enjoy the summers at the campground, and I enjoy not having to pay rent and utilities and all that kind of thing. I help her out with what I can. She helps me out. But like I've said before, I think a tiny home is my next step. And until I can afford to buy some property or something, that's not happening. But yeah, my identity isn't tied up in what I have anymore. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Don't let your identity be tied up in what you have or what people think of you. Anyway, love yourself. See you soon.